Right now, it is my honor to introduce Jakob Dylan and director Andrew Slater. How are you? You know, these interviews that you guys do with these amazing musicians and all these people involved with this scene, their remembrances of the music spin off into remembrances of relationships, remembrances of the scene itself, their own artistry. What was it? Was there anything that they said to you that surprised you the most?
Okay. Well, I think, to be perfectly honest, the things that were the most enlightening, maybe not surprising, was how direct the references were for some of the material that they traded. You know, the film for me was more about, I think, the echo than the canyon. I mean, it takes place in Laurel Canyon, but it's sort of more about the echo of their ideas sort of trading between them in the bands, because those bands all had multiple singers and multiple songwriters, and then across each other in the neighborhood, and then ultimately across to England, where it changes the course of the Beatles. So I think that was probably the most enlightening thing.
Yeah. Jakob, how about you? What surprised you about some of the interviews or some of the answers that they gave you?
Well, I'm yet to be surprised by too much, honestly. I'm ready to be surprised, but no, I didn't realize how closely they were all working together in such a short time, influencing each other as they describe in the film. Because groups today we don't work that closely together, and we don't work in limited time like that. Things don't evolve that quickly, but it must have been pretty awesome to have been there as things were changing so rapidly, as they're making new music and things are unfolding and things were brand new. Because it's hard to find anything new today.
Yeah.
I will say one thing: the film is framed by the song "Expecting to Fly," and I didn't realize that song was, as Stephen said, a warning sign. You know, for Neil to sort of forge his own path, and in a way, that song, as we were exploring the film, became the frame for the film. Even in the title, I mean, it was very representative of the times. People thought no matter how outlandish their dreams were, that they could come true. But as we all know, that kind of boundless optimism never lasts. And so, even though the song is about a relationship and the end of a relationship, we used it to sort of frame the way the era ends. Because for us, there's like three distinct periods in Laurel Canyon. There's the period where the bands come to California seeking to have a life that I saw in A Hard Day's Night of the Beatles. The Byrds have the mushroom haircuts, they have the velvet collars, they have a hit song, and everybody comes here. And then after that period, that brings the Mamas and the Papas and the Buffalo Springfield all sort of chasing that dream, you have the psychedelic period. And things get dark and the drugs change, and then after that, I think there's a retrenchment, and there's a sort of more roots rock and country rock influences what they're doing, and then it's the search for the individual. Beck says in the film, maybe it started with the optimism of the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and then it eventually goes to the place where it's sort of about the individuals searching their own path, and that really is Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, and Joni Mitchell. So for us, it was that first period, that age of innocence when everyone comes here, that was what we were interested in exploring.
And the whole era, I mean, obviously the kind of the crucible of the Laurel Canyon music scene, it's like 4 years at the most, right? I mean, the sort of the forged by fire feeling that you get from it, it was happening so fast, 1,000 days, give or take, is where all of this is happening, and that must have been also something that fueled these amazing songwriters and amazing musicians in different ways, right? Kind of the speed of it.
I think, it's funny. We set out to make a film really about the electrification of folk music and people migrating from New York to LA. That's the path we started on. And I mean, I felt that maybe folk music would never have been electrified in New York because the folk scene was so rigid in the early 60s. People wanted to hear serious, long songs, protest songs. But California sort of represents, I don't know, this kind of freedom, and that anything goes in people's dreams. That's where they go to chase their dreams. And so I think when McGuinn electrifies, the Pete Seeger song Bells of Rhymney, it sets off this chain, and the chain is that George Harrison hears that, and he writes If I Needed Someone, and that goes on Rubber Soul, and Brian Wilson hears Rubber Soul, and that inspires Pet Sounds, and Pet Sounds then inspires Sgt. Pepper. So the bedrock of almost everything in music happens sort of right there.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, you know, it happens in Laurel Canyon.
Yeah. Jacob, those scenes where you're sitting around with Beck and with Regina Spektor, and you know, obviously all of the love for that music is sort of there in all of these artists. But there's also the sort of the sense of carrying the torch in a lot of ways. That these artists really feel like there's like it's sort of it's in them, and it's sort of able to be. Sort of, you know, a bridge from one era to another in many ways. Is that something that all of them felt in one way or another? They were sort of a bridge from one era to another?
Well, I won't speak for them, but I mean, I think the idea that the reason that that group of people is there speaking, and the reason we chose those people, one, they were people we knew and they're friends of ours, and they're all connected to Southern California, either living there or growing up there, or transplants. But what we all do, the people you just mentioned, we all write songs, and we write within the wheelhouse of, it's not a dirty word to me, pop songs, you know, and that's where it kind of begins in the way that there were pop songs before that, but that's the moment that we were told, if you look back and research, that's the moment that it unfolded, you could do anything you wanted. And that's what we all relate to. More, although the artists you mentioned, we all do very different things. But we're bound by that one thing, which is we have respect for that group of artists that open up the doors that we could do anything.
So I just want to read back a little bit of a quote that Andrew said a couple years ago, which I just love because it also captures so much of sort of this Laurel Canyon period that we're talking about, which is that music is sort of more than just an act. It's music, it's style, it's album art, it's attitude, and all of that sort of captures something of a moment of an era. And I feel like, you know, you cannot really think of that Laurel Canyon music scene without thinking of all of those elements. You know, the Byrds mosaic art, or Mama Cass's kitchen wall, you know, where people are writing things on it. That sort of sense of community, and all of that sort of coming together and coming out through the artistry of the music. But all of those factors are there in helping create it, right?
Well, I mean, I think I don't remember saying that, but I take your word for it. But I think what you're referring to is the alchemy that gets created by the two-dimensional image and the sound of music, you know, and I think that if success in music was based on musicianship, Toto would have been the biggest band in the world because they were the best musicians. But it's not. It's based on, you know, love and sex and rebellion, and how those things get distilled into the images that we see of the people that we love. Creates, you know, the alchemy I'm talking about. As far as Laurel Canyon, it's so diverse. You know, there's like I said, there's that period where you know the canyon, the country store, which was the sort of hub for groceries. You know, you'd see people with bare feet and, you know, sort of a classic hippie thing. I don't know, you know, in that period of 65 to 67, I don't know if it was fully developed. I mean, the Byrds look cool, you know. They started to look like the Beatles, and then they had their own thing. But I just don't know if, like the Springfield, they were amazing. The thing that's more relevant to me is that they were multiple singers and multiple songwriters trying to emulate George and Paul and John and Ringo in that way, and that ultimately breaks them up. And you know, in the film, the songs that we chose sort of tell you that. You know, Go Where You Want to Go, even though it's the first single by the Mamas and Papas in 1965, it is a song that lays out that the boundaries of the relationship that John Phillips was having with Michelle Phillips, they were sort of different, and that it creates tension. You know, Going Back is also the moment where David Crosby's relationship with the Byrds unravels, because he wants to do a song about a menage a trois, which nobody could convince him that in 1967 that wasn't really getting on the radio. And then, again, as Stephen tells you, that Expecting to Fly is the moment where Neil sort of goes off on his own path, because they had a wealth of material, but it was divergent directions. You
mentioned the sort of the geography of the place as well. Let's talk for a second about the, like, even taking Michelle Phillips to that amazing studio, obviously, where the Mamas and the Papas recorded, like seeing all of these places that were so crucial as well. That's just as much a part of that era as the musicians themselves and the music itself, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it's as much to me. It's as much about the echo as it is about the canyon, and the aspect of the echo that, you know, is in those rooms. I mean, reverb and echo chambers and the size of a room give character to any sound, and particularly the human voice. For us, you know, Jacob having worked at Sunset Sound, and I having worked at, you know, Capitol and Sunset for various things, those rooms in California that have contributed so much to the American culture and our music, they may not be here in 10 years because there's so much development in Hollywood right now, and a single-story building may not survive. So for us, there's a certain romanticism about those rooms and what's happened there, and I wanted to shoot them in a way that maybe gave you the feeling that I got when I walked in there, or Jakob got when he walked in there to record. So that's part of the echo there.
Yeah. Who was first on board in terms of, or first person that you guys sat with to kind of set the stage in some ways for the interviews? Who was it? It was Clapton, right? Was it?
Yeah, I'm not a journalist. I don't interview people for a living. I have no experience interviewing people. But my first interview was Eric Clapton. Big, giant jumbo plane across the pond and sat with Eric Clapton. But at first it was awkward, and on the plane I thought that's what we started with. We weren't even sure what we didn't know where the narrative of the film was going to go. But Eric was gracious enough. He responded, said, "Sure, I'll be there."
You know, he had come to Laurel Canyon when we had recorded with him and filmed him making the record. He talked a little bit about his experiences in coming there and the eccentrics and the people that he was drawn to and his views of America. So, you know, it was all about people scheduling. Yeah. You know, he was available in March, and we were like, we're shooting now, and we're going to get him. And Brian wasn't. And, you know, the reason it took 3 years, I think we just had to wait for people.
I think, speaking of waiting for, is the band, are we at about ready for the band? Have they set up for the most part? If not, we can do a quick audience question.
They're much more interesting than we are.
Yeah, is there a question from out? Anybody here have a question?
Anybody have a question, just shoot up your hand, and I will repeat the question back.
There you go,
Yep.
right there in the white shirt.
Yep. Did Neil Young know he was closing the film?
He didn't know he was closing the film because we didn't know he was closing the film. But really, he becomes the metaphor, you know, in a sense, for a guy forging his own path, playing a psychedelic solo. You know, it's sort of like our version of A Day in the Life, really. That's what we were kind of nodding to with that song, with the way those two songs run together. And, you know, at one point we thought, oh, we should talk to Neil. And then we had this sort of beautiful thing where it could really be the ending of the film, where you see him lift his guitar up as a young guy, and then the guitar comes down, and there he is in the present day. So we thought that was
as a less young guy.
I think we are set to go. I want to make sure that you guys know this, because for the next 2 nights, Friday night and Saturday night, after the 8:30 show, Jakob Dylan and the Echo in the Canyon Band will be performing as well. So tell your friends, spread the word, come back. You're going to want to see him again. And I think we're ready, right? Ladies and gentlemen, Jakob Dylan and the Echo in the Canyon Band.